Welcome, Philippe.
Good evening and welcome, bienvenidos, to the Hispanic Society, our member exclusive program, Las Tertulias de Arte Hispano, or Hispanic Art Gatherings of 2021. We're still in 2021. Thank you once again to all of our members who have joined us monthly for almost a year now, and welcome to all of those who are tuning in for the first time. We continue these conversations on the first Tuesday of each month. And if you are not a member yet, please do consider joining by going to our website, thehispanicsociety.org, and search for membership under support. You go to support. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with the Hispanic Society's Senior Curator of Paintings, Drawings, and Metalwork, Marcus Burke, for a conversation entitled Pancho Fierro's Holy Week Stroll at the Hispanic Society of America, and you will discover some astonishing things. Marcus has been with the Hispanic Society for over 20 years, serving as curator of paintings, drawings, and metalwork, as I said, and he has written extensively on the museum's collections. He holds a BA in English from Princeton University, an MTS in church history from Harvard, and a PhD in art history from the Institute of Fine Arts. He's a fairly well-educated man. He was also adjunct professor. In the 70s, he had a research fellowship at the Metropolitan Museum. In the 80s, he served as chief curator and assistant director at the Meadows Museum in Dallas. And in 1990, he co-curated at the Met the groundbreaking exhibition, Mexico, Splendors of 30 Centuries. He has been a guest curator at several other museums, and most recently a consultant at the Philadelphia Museum for its recent huge exhibition on Latin American colonial art. Marcus is a natural didact, if I may say, and has taught at many universities, from Yale, SMU, Rutgers, the Bard, and many more. After Marcus's presentation, for those who are not accustomed to this program, we will have a brief conversation, and then we invite you to join by submitting your questions in the comments section. You may submit your questions, by the way, your comments, to any point that is made during the discussion, again, using the I guess it's chat, no, the comments section. So I thank you all for being with us, and I pass the screen now on to Marcus Burke.
Thank you so much, Philippe. I'm going to share my screen now so you can see the images I've brought to show you. Today's object is one of the most astonishing works at the Hispanic Society. It's a watercolor scroll made at Lima, Peru in the early 1830s by Francisco Pancho Fierro in imitation of East Asian painted scrolls. I'm sorry, I don't seem to have control of my, you have to bear with me, please. I'm going to start over. There. It's nearly 18 inches high and over 15 feet long, and it shows a procession from the Church of San Agustín.
We no longer see the slides.
Sorry, what?
We no longer see the slides. Are you shared screen?
I don't know. Just a moment, please. It worked 10 minutes ago.
Oh, Alex.
Hold on, please. Now we'll try again.
Okay, there you are. There you are.
You there?
Yep.
Okay.
You just have to make the presentation full screen. Perfect.
All right. As I say, it's 18 inches high and over 15 feet long, and it shows a procession from the Church of San Agustín, which is just off camera to the right, during Holy Week. And I've included a photo of the scroll in the installation of one of our international exhibition treasures venues, just to give you an idea of how large and impressive it is. The scroll also gives us a glimpse into early Republican Peru, a little more than a decade after the coming of independence to Spain's colonies. Now, we know a great deal about Pancho Fierro, the man, and relatively little about Pancho Fierro, the artist. We know, for example, what he looked like. And you can see here an early portrait from his mature but still young man. And then on the left, a photograph from his old age. We know that he was born at Lima in 1807. His father was a wealthy young priest named Nicolás del Fierro, and his mother an Afro-Hispanic slave named Maria del Carmen, who belonged to Nicholas's aunt. Francisco was freed at birth, given his father's name, and presumably raised in the upper class family of his aunt or grandmother, where his mother worked before she was also freed in 1823. Fierro married Heracia Cornejo in 1828. Among the things we know about him as an artist is that he probably studied with the man who did the work on the right, Francisco Javier Cortés from Quito, Ecuador, who was professor of drawing for the School of Medicine in Lima. Notice that Fierro had to go to medical school in order to study art. There was no fine art academy in Lima at the time. You can see not only so much of a stylistic relationship between Cortés and Fierro, who's over here on the left, but a sense of the figure and the ethnographic type that the two artists are representing. Fierro is listed in the census records of Lima from the 1830s through the 1850s as an artist. He maintained a shop or atelier on the Calle Baquijano and inherited property from his father's family. When Fierro died, his obituaries described him as a local cultural hero, citing his paintings of customs that transfer national types to paper or canvas. Here's an example of that. It's a group of Peruvians enjoying a romeria, or semi-religious pilgrimage, in the countryside around Lima. Like all the images, except two of Fierro and his school that I will show you, this one is in the collection of the Hispanic Society. In fact, the Hispanic Society has just received a large National Endowment for the Humanities grant as the lead exhibition, as the lead institution in the United States for an international study of this type of ethnographic watercolor, which will include both humanities and art historical scholarship and a state-of-the-art scientific analysis of pigments and papers, along with artificial intelligence aided imaging. Fierro left an immense body of works in watercolor, ranging from large-scale watercolor scenes such as this one to single-leaf, single-figure works. Here you see a wonderful character study of a mountain village mayor come down to Lima on business. The baton is a symbol of his office. And on the right, the taller of the two women is called a tapada, a veiled woman. Women wore these black veils, often exposing only one eye in Lima into the 1840s, although by then it had become something of a retro fashion, as we'd say today. Originally a holdover from Islamic culture in Spain, especially Seville, the veil protected the modesty of women when they went out, and it was really something that was quite unusual in European culture, as well as in the New World. By the late colonial period, of course, both married and unmarried women had much more personal freedom, so that women of all types wore these veils. They were very convenient, of course, if a woman did not want to be recognized on the street. And as a consequence, the tapada had some of the racy connotations that the maja had for women at the time of Goya and the Duchess of Alba. This woman and her maid, however, are on their way to church. That is why the maid is carrying a rug to sit on. Fierro must have been tremendously prolific. He was long-lived, active from the 1820s to the 1870s, 6 decades of creativity. Today, there are several thousand leaves of his and his contemporaries' work known to exist in spite of the inherently ephemeral character of this souvenir art form. At the Hispanic Society alone, we have over 600 Latin America costumbrista watercolors, the largest single collection in the world, of which the vast majority are by Fierro, his circle, his followers, and copyists. Fierro's watercolors express a wonderful sense of human personality. His figures engage us with their direct gaze and animated faces. On the right, a candle seller hawks his wares. You see them hanging here, his candles from their wicks off of his stick.
Marcus, if I may interrupt for just one moment.
Yes.
There seems to be a box of text appearing in the center of the presentation. Is it possible to move that yellow box?
I don't know. Give me a second.
Sure.
I'm so sorry, everyone. Start over again. And I can't get to my control panel. I'm so sorry about this. We will share screen. We will do it. Share. And start again. Is that better?
It is for now, yes. Yes.
Oh, I'm so glad. In any case, the woman on the left,
Thank you.
a rural woman of mostly indigenous mixed descent called a chola, sells mani or Andean peanuts. Her lively face and somewhat quizzical expression, not to mention her natural beauty, explain why the image might have appealed to a young American naval officer, Samuel Alexander Tyler, who brought this and many other watercolors back from Peru in 1847. Emotional expression often takes a comic turn in Fierro's art. Here, a poor Franciscan friar in his confessional is totally scandalized by whatever the demure, obviously penitent Tapata has just told him. The humor pervading Fierro's works also carries with it a certain form of social or moral criticism, an attitude Fierro shares with his great predecessor in the graphic arts, Francisco Goya. Fierro's fame was literally international. His works were exported in the Pacific trade as far away as Canton, China, where local Chinese artists made exquisite copies of them on delicate pith paper made from coconut fiber, such as this one from our collection. Very quickly, let me tell you some information about where Fierro sold his works. The French diplomat, artist, bibliophile, ethnographer, and author, Léonce Engrand, lived in Peru and Bolivia from roughly 1836 to 1860 and collected costumbrista scenes from several Latin American countries. Engrand tells us that Fierro made good money selling foreigners these products of his labor, which have the merit of great precision as much in their rendering of types as in their details. The watercolor shows the Calle de las Mantas, where two art dealers, Inocente Ricordi and L, we don't know his first name, Villiers, were located just off frame to the left. As you can see from this satirical lithograph that Ricordi had made against, I suppose, his competitor Villiers, these shops sold prints, drawings, possibly paintings, printed music, musical instruments, military uniform accessories, buttons, and a wide variety of other items. Ricordi, who may have represented Fierro's artistic imitators, basically competitors, rather than Fierro himself, carefully marked all of the prints and drawings he sold with his stamp, as you can see here. One can imagine naval officers, diplomats, international merchants, and their families, passengers at a port of call headed to other destinations in America and Asia, and a small but growing number of what we now call tourists, rummaging through bins or portfolios in the shops of Ricordi, Villiers, and other vendors, selecting images of local types and costumes to take away as souvenirs of their visit. And from the many examples of Fierro's works in Peruvian collection, We may assume that upper class Limeños, people from Lima, also bought them, especially in the second half of Fierro's career, when he had become part of the city's urban myth-making. We can compare Fierro to his United States contemporaries, such as William Sidney Mount on the left, or in one of the most famous images of American art, George Caleb Bingham's fur traders descending the Missouri at the Metropolitan Museum, or even better, to Currier and Ives at the top here, or to George Catlin's Mandan Village of 1833, which is exactly contemporary with the scroll. And I show you at bottom right an image de Vinal. Some of you, Philippe perhaps, will remember these from childhood. They were even found in Kentucky in my day. It's not known who commissioned the scroll at the Hispanic Society, but it was certainly known who owned it. That is Jean-Baptiste Gabriel Amédée Chomet de Fosse, French consul in Lima, 1827 to 29, and resident there until 1841. An inscription on the back of the scroll says 2/1832. This may indicate the date. The scroll is meant to be unrolled from left to right, and it gives the viewer a panoramic, even a cinematic tour of the Holy Week procession from beginning to end. You can see here that if you move from left to right, the procession seems to pass you from right to left. And I'm sorry, it gives you this ringside seat, we would call it, to a Holy Week procession in Lima. And it depicts a series of pasos, floats, that come down the street in all Holy Week processions, corresponding to Christ's Passion, the week between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday in the Christian liturgical calendar. And now I'd like to attempt to give you an experience of someone unrolling the scroll so you have a sense of the whole thing. Here is the beginning with a figure of death leading the procession, appropriate for Holy Week, the entry into Jerusalem or Palm Sunday, a huge float of the Last Supper, the agony in the garden and the taking of Christ, the flagellation of Christ, the Via Crucis with Christ stumbling on the way to Calvary, followed by the raising of the cross and some dignitaries who are accompanying an image of the crucifixion with the Blessed Virgin Mary and St. John the Baptist, accompanied by Augustinian priests. And remember, of course, the scroll is one continuous image, so long that I have to divide it into two photos to show it on a slide. Well, now that you've seen the whole scroll, let's quickly go through it again to enjoy the many wonderful details of each scene. The first figures that come into view are acolytes carrying what is probably a veiled cross, followed by the figure of death, which is actually still existing, the Death Triumphant by Balthasar Gavilan, which is in the Church of San Agustín in Lima and has been carried in processions for over 250 years. The psychological touch is not omitted. Here from the balcony, we see a group of people, including one collapsed into the arms of a nun. And on the right, notice the sad expression of a military officer who must have faced death often in the incessant wars of the region. This close-up also gives us an opportunity to do some costume history. As you can see, the man's costume is rather like that which we call the style of William IV of the 1830s. Notice the flaring skirt and the smooth profile of the cutaway. Then comes an image, presumably of an Augustinian saint in penitence, accompanied by the leaders of the confraternity that sponsored the procession. We know from contemporary guidebooks that San Agustín was the host church for a confraternity of Afro-Hispanic Peruvians, Limeños of African descent. You can clearly see that they are people of color, so that we may be looking at an event in which Fierro who was partially of African descent, actually participated. This also possibly explains Fierro's interest in these images of the confraternity members dressed as penitents in his single leaf examples. The next passo is Palm Sunday, the entry into Jerusalem. And here the scroll begins to tell us quite a bit about the architecture, commerce, and street life of Lima in the era. As the Frenchman Engram pointed out, the details are quite precise. Fierro is careful to indicate the street numbers and show the signs on the various stores along the route. Here, a bookstore or libreria is behind the float. Notice also the panaderos, or maybe bizcocheros, bread or sponge cake vendors who were carrying their wares on their heads. This was a favorite type of Fierro. He often showed them in single leaf, and just wonderful. Each one of these men have a different personality and expression or so forth, largely being ignored by these high-ranking military officers parading past them. Oh, I'm sorry, one other thing. Please notice here on the right, people looking into the shop of a pharmacy. Here are some other examples of these wonderful signs. There's a botica, the pharmacy of which I spoke, the Fonda del Oro de Oro, the Inn of the Golden Ball hanging here, the hat store with military hats among its merchandise, a relojeria, meaning a clock shop, but also a silver shop, another cafe with a beautiful glass lantern hanging, and a Fábrica de Cerveza, a beer factory next to a boot store. And here is one of the clients, we may say, of the beer factory, pie-faced, staggering out onto the street. The wooden balconies that line the street were typical of colonial and early 19th century Peru. And here we see a view of the Giron, or street of Camaná, in Lima, where the Museum of Popular Arts is located, with this wonderful balcony now coated in brass or tin stamped plates. Here's a view from 1853 of the Giron Callao in Lima in 1855, with the balconies going down it. And on the lower right is a balcony that survived from colonial times into the 20th century. Other nearby streets, such as the Giron Ica and Giron Ucayali, also preserve buildings from Fierro's era. And I understand some people from Lima are listening to us today, and I'd like to have any information you might have about these streets, because the names, a lot of them have changed and so forth since Fierro's time. Next comes a massive float of the Last Supper with an interesting detail to the right, which is a demandero from the confraternity looking for alms. And next, the people he's talking to are dressed in really very precise costumes, which date the whole scroll to the 1830s. I'm also amazed by this animated conversation going on here between these two men. The man in glasses is companion and another man, while two military officers look on, a little bit aghast at whatever's being said. It's an interesting psychological detail. Next comes the agony in the garden and the taking of Christ, again with these remarkable personality types in the same image. Fierro's powers of psychological characterization are simply amazing. Notice the flat roofs of the buildings, and here's an example of a mat, an estera, or a cane mat laying on them. In an earthquake-prone region, this was a lightweight way to roof a building that wouldn't fall down on you in an earthquake. Underneath the float, you see all these tiny little feet coming out. Everybody see that? Those are about 40 young men straining like mad to carry that float through the streets of Lima. And the women, again, are dressed as tapadas in veils. Next, again, comes the flagellation of Christ, an obvious motif for the penitential aspect of Holy Week. And behind, as I said, is the boot shop and the beer factory already mentioned. After this comes the Via Crucis with the Lord falling on the way to Calvary, followed on the far right of the scroll by the raising of the cross and a group of dignitaries who are accompanying the final and climactic passo of the crucifixion with the Virgin Mary and St. John the Evangelist. And then on the right, this swarm of Augustinian friars with their leaders in dalmatics and chasubles who are taking something out of a tabernacle on an altar between two suspended canopies coming off the buildings. And then they're going to parade whatever that is in the parade under that black baldachin on 6 poles. The sign, oh, notice, by the way, the barrels on the roof to catch water and to weigh down the mats on the ceiling. The last sign on the house, number 19, it identifies the street as the Calle de San Agustín. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this brief tour of early Republican Lima and have gotten an idea of one of the most interesting objects of the Hispanic Society. Now I hope to hear from you and perhaps answer your questions, those that you may have. Thank you, and I turn the microphone back over to Philippe.
Thank you, Marcus. I think this was really an extraordinary presentation of an amazing scroll, which I found rather entertaining to follow from left to right, being used to looking at Chinese scrolls from right to left. And really, one has to be grateful to Pancho Fierro for his attention to detail and his sense of observation, because it ends up, the scroll being a source of primary evidence really on daily life in the 19th century. It's absolutely amazing. And frankly, I've looked at this scroll several times in the exhibitions where it has traveled, and never looked at it in the detail that you did. And I realized that I didn't look at it correctly. It really, one has to travel in it. But I have a question for you. The custom, let's say, at the Met, of going into the storeroom of the Asian department, and much of the space is taken by the lack of boxes in which the scrolls are kept rolled. How was this scroll, how did this scroll travel or move? Was it rolled? Did it have a box? Did the Hispanic Society have the box in which it must have come?
Well, we had a box, but it seemed awfully casual in the early 20th century. The earliest mention we have of the scroll is from an 1854 sale in Paris, where it is called un immense rouleur, a scroll. So we know that it was rolled then. And since then, it's always been rolled as far as I can determine, except when displayed at the Hispanic Society or in our exhibitions. And the other part of the question about being designed to read from left to right, other than right to left, as Chinese scrolls definitely are, and Chinese paintings for that matter. It's true, but the problem for Fierro was to present the procession in order as it emerged over here from the church buildings where the passos were stored, and then moved down the street. And to look at that from the viewer's point of view, we're standing in the Plaza de San Agustín, and I don't know if has some artistic license with what shops are on the other side of the street, but to show this view, then the procession would have to move off to the viewer's left and seemed therefore to be coming from the right. And so that limited how he could unroll the scroll, but I don't think he had that much of a precise idea of Chinese scrolls. The East Asian influence in colonial and 19th century Latin America was general. It was everywhere. It included folding screens, lacquer furniture, boxes, paintings on mother of pearl, frames and furniture inlaid with mother of pearl, which is called najar in Spanish. So I think there was a more general aspect here that he was marketing to. And as I said, we don't know who commissioned this, and another scroll in Chaumet's collection. So, but that it was influenced by East Asian art seems obvious.
Marcus, I was very pleased when you said that we have the largest and finest collection of his work at the Hispanic Society. Do you know, I mean, this is a tour de force this pro. Did he make many like this, or is this one of very few?
Well, the only two we think we know where both of Chaumette de Fos scrolls are. He had two. There's another one in a collection in South America, which you can only get very, very bad photos of, or I would have showed them.
Okay.
And since there are two scrolls known and two scrolls documented, there is some feeling that they are the two. Ours has a more solid provenance, but you never know for sure that there isn't something happen in the 6 months you don't have a document. But it I would say is 98 or 99% certain that this is Chaumette de Fos, his work, and I presume the other one is too. I haven't seen the other one. I don't know if it says 1/1832 on the back of it or something like that that would document it more carefully. The technique of the mounting, even though it's on painting, not on silk, is very similar to East Asian techniques for this kind of thing. Although all the paper is extremely high grade, either European or Latin American papers. Really very, very fine materials. And they got the best watercolors. I will be able to tell you exactly what the pigments are in about 18 months.
All right. Well, we'll sit tight in the meanwhile. I'm sure there are many questions from our friends and those who are, all of you who are watching. Abigail, Christina, do you want to?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Marcus, for that wonderful presentation. We have a member who is wondering, why did Fierro and his imitators do watercolors over and over again instead of just making prints?
Oh, well, that's a very, very interesting question with a partly commercial answer. Lithographic limestones come from quarries in Bavaria and what we today call the Czech Republic. Getting them to Lima would have been a costly shipping proposition. Now, there were lithographic workshops in Lima. Fierro and a man named Ignacio Marino collaborated on lithographs, but it was so much work to do the lithograph, and then the lithograph would have to be ground down and used immediately for a commercial printing of banknotes and things like that, so that it was much easier to quickly do single leaf watercolors of figures. And again, there's a kind of an East Asian calligraphic aspect to that. And especially if you set up an atelier with your daughter, perhaps, or with a group of people helping you. We have so many of these images, and it's clear that some are copies, some are brilliant originals. I showed you many of those today. And it was just easier to do that than go through the cumbersome and difficult process of lithography when you didn't have a constant supply of lithographic limestone. Also, you were getting, when you bought it, not just another print, but an actual painting, a small painting, a work of art. And I think this added to the value of them as something to acquire. Now, eventually, the lithographs of people like Fierro, along with photographs being printed, the carte de visite, the sort of thing, pushed the watercolors off the market. So that after about 1860, I don't think there were that many of them made. But the answer to the question initially is it was easier to do watercolors than to do lithographs.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much, Marcus. Our next question is that the modestly concealed tapadas show an extraordinary interest in highlighting their bottoms. Fierro shows evident interest in this fashion, or is it a costume or custom or both?
Wait, I'm going back to an image now. It is an elaborate costume, which was the custom. And it was very difficult. It was not just the veil. There was this dress that you wore under it. And the dress has, what are they called? These paddings in the, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the image of this woman. Just bear with me a second. Should be right here. Oh, well, I'm sorry. There's one woman on the street. She's standing right down here, and she's looking back either at this very handsome Afro-Hispanic military officer or at an equally handsome priest. But to get into this costume, not only did they have to pull up a petticoat to puff out the rear portion of a skirt, then they slipped a sheath skirt over that with knife pleats, and then they put on their veil, which was attached to everything underneath. And you'll notice that they have a shawl underneath on top of it, like a manton de Manila. And finally, they're dressed and can go out. It must have been an extremely inconvenient form of dressing, and it didn't last much longer than 1840s. But here you see her with the veil going over a comb, like the Duchess of Alba wears, with her mantilla going over it, and then the shawl underneath, and then the saya skirt with a knife pleating that allows this, what are they called? Bustles? I think that's the word, isn't it? To puff out behind in the back. But there was actually a bunch of petticoats that were drawn up with a strap to make padding behind. And we see the women sitting somewhat uncomfortably from this. Thank you for the question.
Incredible. Thank you, Marcus. We have one more question here. Well, a quick question is, could you repeat the name of the ex-owner of the scroll? And then the second question is, are the colors accurate? Do they reflect the pigments, that would have been visible during Pancho Fierro's time, or have they faded?
They have not. And they're really quite vivid. They were very high class pigments to start with. And we know that the trade was very international in pigments. They even got to China and even to the south of India, where botanicals and these kind of ethnographic images were made. There's been several dissertations on this subject of pigments. The man's name again, and I'm going to butcher French, I'm wanted in 3 arrondissements of Paris for the cold-blooded murder of the French tongue, but he was Jean-Baptiste Gabriel Amédée Chaumet de Fosse. Close enough, Philippe?
It's close enough, considering I haven't seen it written. Is it Chaumet?
It might be Fosse because it's F-O-S-S, accent aigu S.
I'd have to see it. It. But
it's a really old-fashioned name. But he was the French consul in Lima in the 1820 to 29 period, but he lived there until 1841. So he was there in the 1830s.
Yeah, I want to add to your answer on the fading of the pigments. If when it was not seen, the scroll was kept rolled and in a box, obviously that protected it also enormously.
Yep.
Thank you. And we just have one final question, Marcus. And the question is it possible that there would have been liturgical dramas performed at this time in and around this space of the processions, or was this practice long gone by this point?
Well, there may have been liturgical dramas performed in the churches. The Jesuits were reinstated by this time, and they were certainly doing it. I'm sure the Augustinian and Dominicans did as well. I don't have any evidence for that in Lima. I haven't seen evidence in the artistic sources for that in Cusco. Um, these mystery plays or miracle plays, if we can use the medieval terms for them, the autos sacramentales, we know they were performed. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz wrote them. We have many texts for them. And I think that Lope de Vega wrote a great many back in Spain, but I simply don't have any evidence to answer that question. It seems to me it would be hard to do in a very narrow street with a very large procession and a lot of people watching. I can't imagine it happening in Seville during Holy Week or even in Lima today. The streets aren't any wider than they were then. But yes, drama was a part of the whole liturgical year, and above all, during Holy Week. But whether it happened in the street at the time of the processions, I simply don't know.
Great.
Maybe someone from Lima knows if they're listening, you know?
Thank you both again.
Well, if there are no further questions or no further comments, I think we've been enriched considerably by this presentation and this, in a sense, for many of us, a discovery of an extraordinary document that gives us such a clear image of the customs and the dress and so forth in Lima, Peru, in the 19th century. And I'm very grateful to you, Marcus. Grateful for all of you who are watching. We're thrilled to have as many of you watching, despite our inability to meet in person. I'm so happy that you are here, counted on a little square. I remind you that the next Tertulia will take place on the first Tuesday in May, which is on May 4th. It's at 6 p.m. and we will have, once again, we've had him before, Curator Patrick Lanigan, who's the head of the Department of Prints and Photographs, and he will discuss the work of a very important photographer, and her name is Ruth Matilda Anderson, and it's a group of photographs that are part of the collection of the Hispanic Society of more than 150,000 photographs of the 19th and early 20th century. That is just one of the many, many extraordinary holdings of this institution, of which you are the friends. And do go and multiply and get more friends for us and join us on the 4th of May. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.